Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Harmony Alliance webinar on migrant and refugee women's contributions to Australia and recognition of those contributions, breaking the honours and award ceiling. Scala here right next to me, she's the CEO of Migration Council Australia. She will be moderating today's session, and Tasneem is one of the speakers for today. I'll hand over to Carla for more introductions of herself and the speakers as well.
Thank you very much, Sana, and I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country wherever everyone is gathered, and also elders past and present. I want to, we have two panellists today, but I think one is possibly still in court as we speak and will join us shortly. But first of all, I'll introduce Tasneem Chopra, who has an OAM. She is a cross-cultural consultant who specialises in leadership, cultural competence and intersectionality, so topics that are really close to everyone's heart at Harmony Alliance. And in 2020, she was awarded an OAM. She has been named an anti-racism champion by the Australian Human Rights Commission, holds a distinguished alumni award from the La Trobe University in recognition of her impact to the diversity sector. Tasneem, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to start by asking you, what did the recognition mean to you and your family?
Well, I looked at it as a peer recognition. So it was a recognition of work. So I got just to be clear, I received my OAM last year, 2020. And I don't know who nominated me, but I think I have a sense of who might have written some supporting letters, which we can talk to later how that works. But my sense is the award was for services to community. So I presume it's the work that I've done in the sector, which relates to, as you mentioned, issues on identity, racism, intersectionality and belonging. I'm touching a lot on gender, family violence and issues that are pertinent to marginalised women in this country. So there's a lot of different ways in which you could look at what the impact was. So I presume it was somewhere in relation to that sort of field I do, that's sort of social justice, community education, and a bit of media engagement as well.
Fantastic. And in terms of your broader community, your family, what was the meaning of it?
You know, I said this, I think, on the day that I got my at the investiture ceremony, I was able to bring my kids and my mum along to the event, and I think I said this is actually mainly for my mum. I know that sounds really cheesy, but I looked at the story of my parents who arrived in Australia when we were young, in the early 70s, and they arrived as a secondment from a Commonwealth country to another Commonwealth at the time, with very little to start with, in the sense that they were economic migrants, yes, but they had no connections here, and they were really starting from scratch, from a really comfortable life in Nairobi, in Kenya at the time, where they were like 5 generations of East African Indians in that area, to a brand new place, new country, new everything, new culture. And for them to make that big jump and lurch, not knowing what the future would hold with 3 young girls, was probably, you know, in retrospect, especially as an older person now and as a parent, I can appreciate the gravitas of that move more and what that would have meant. So I look at the sacrifice they made, I look at the ethic that they instilled in us about giving back, of doing something. My parents were both active in their respective careers. My dad was a doctor, my mum was a nurse, but there was a lot of community engagement, cultural events that they were participating in that they encouraged us to be a part of, always pushed us academically, as is the woe of every Asian, you know, child in this country, with parents who were very much about, you know, study and achieve and work and contribute. So I had that always ingrained in me, and so I feel like this award was an affirmation of that, the outcome of those efforts from them. And it was like, I'm honestly, Mum got to, because of COVID, the governor at the time couldn't pin the medal on, so my mum got to pin it, which I think was actually even more symbolic, because it was like, Mum, this is your time, this is your chance, so that you can sort of see, I guess, the trajectory of the efforts that you've put in and where they've come out. So she felt really proud, and she felt, you know, it was her day. I was just the recipient.
Yeah.
And she felt a sense of closure, like all the sacrifices they've made that had come to something, and she was immensely proud. And I'm very grateful for the award, but I'm very happy that my mum feels a sense of, I wouldn't say validation, but I say a sense of satisfaction that she could see that the migration journey had culminated in the child of a migrant achieving something that was respected by the institution.
Yes, and I want to come back to that. So respected by the institution. In some senses, the Honours and Awards and the Order of Australia system is very much part of a sort of an establishment institution. So I want to ask you, why is it so important that an establishment institution recognises diversity in terms of gender and age and ethnicity and culture?
Simply because that's what is the makeup of Australia. So I think by not addressing it adequately, there is a missed opportunity. And I think just let's leave it at that.
Yeah. So to some extent, a big part of that puzzle is really around who gets nominated as well. And having spoken to the Secretariat for the Honours Council on several occasions, one of the reflections is that the big struggle is that often men get nominated far more than women, and that the diversity really isn't there in the nomination process. And I think so this is part of what I think today's session is really about tackling. How do we make sure that there is the opportunity there from the nominations that do exist, that the institutional structures reflect modern Australia? Ralph's just joined us. Hi, Ralph. Your sound is not on, so I'm just going to get you to turn your sound on if you can.
My apologies for being late. I've just got out of court.
We did note that. Thank you very much for joining us. Judge Ralph Sulio has been a member of the council that determines who gets Orders of Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about the council, the structure, and how the Order of Australia system works?
The council is an independent council in many respects. There are what are called community members, and generally speaking, a community member from each state, or an attempt to have a community member from each state. And I was the community member from South Australia. There is a representative of each state government and territory government on the council. And then there are some ex officio members, including the Chief of Defence Force and a representative of the government of the day, either an elected representative or their proxy or delegate who comes along to the meetings. Should I go on to talk a little about the process?
Yeah.
We'll come back to the question of nominations and the issue of the importance of some activism in relation to nominations for diversity. But the process is a fairly rigorous one, where nominations are received by the council, and the council has available to it considerable resources, quite a significant staff that's based in the Governor General's wing or portfolio, who research the nominations very thoroughly. They speak to referees, and each nomination should be accompanied by nominated referees, but they then go outside that process to make inquiries of people involved in the areas of interest or areas of endeavour of the person who's been nominated, in effect to check the accuracy and the veracity of the positive comments that have been made about the nominee. Obviously, nominations are put together by someone on behalf of the nominee. The nominee, generally speaking, doesn't know about the nomination, and that is regarded as a fairly important part of the process, so that it adds an element of independence, so that the inquiries that can be made are made confidentially. The Secretariat of the Australian Honours Council then puts together the summarised results of their research of the nomination, of things that have been written about the nominee, and that's distributed to each of the members of the council ahead of a meeting that takes place twice each year, one in preparation for the Australia Day announcement of awards, and the other in relation to the Queen's Birthday announcement of awards. The statistics are available, but there's something over 1,000 nominations for each session, and the process of reading through and analysing the nominations is a complex, time-consuming process, and then the members of the council come together over a 2-day meeting in Canberra at Government House to express their opinions in relation to each of the nominations. That is, in relation to the over 1,000 nominations. So it is quite a process, and so I congratulate you, Tasneem, on your award and on getting through that process. It would have been a very carefully considered award. So that's the mechanics of it, if you like.
Yep. And of those 1,000 nominations that come through, how many actually make it through into the honours system? How many applicants are successful?
Yeah, I think the
would vary, but
it does. But the success rate of nominations is, I think, over 50%. But I think what, generally speaking, that reflects in part, and in fact, it might be well over 60%, but it reflects in part that nominations are made in good faith by people who genuinely believe that the nominee has served the community or a particular area of scientific endeavour or whatever the area may be, in a way above and beyond the usual call. So people are not making frivolous nominations or nominations as favours. They're making, generally speaking, well thought out, well crafted decisions about who should be nominated for their good work. And that, I think that's reflected in what is a high rate of success for nominations.
Absolutely. And I want to come back down to the process of, generally speaking, someone doesn't self-nominate for these.
That's right.
Yeah.
You did touch on, Carla, the issue of women not tending to nominate each other for a start. And I have to say that there are certain areas of endeavour where people are, have received awards in the past and are, I might say, skilled in the process of properly nominating deserving people, but in a way that is structured to increase the chances of a successful nomination. And there are certain professions, and I don't think it's in any way insulting, rather congratulatory to say that the medical profession, for example, who the members of which do very good work for the community, many of them either in developing wonderful scientific advances or performing work for underprivileged communities or faithfully serving their communities for many decades and so on, are properly recognised, but the other members of the community help each other by making confidential nominations for deserving colleagues. So I think I've carefully and diplomatically trodden the path of explaining why it is, for example, that the medical profession might feature heavily. And I think it's important to recognise that, for example, members of diverse or newly emerging communities will be at something of a disadvantage in putting together skillful nominations and may not appreciate the process. So it's important that there be an educative process to ensure that people understand the importance of the awards, the process for nominating people for the awards, and the way in which a careful and detailed nomination can be put together.
I want to come and I want to talk to you a little bit more about what makes a good nomination in a second. But I also want to ask, before I ask, I'll preface this by saying that at one point when I was an advisor in government, I did ask the question, why is it that there is such a gender disparity? And the answer that was given to me was that, generally speaking, men nominate men and women nominate men. So I want to ask Tasneem, why is it so important that women start to nominate other women?
Oh, for so many reasons, Carla. I think it's because, first of all, we have great oversight over the women who are doing the work, who need nomination, who tend to do so with much more invisibility and less accolades in the first place. It's a catch-22. They don't have the awards and significance behind them to often merit the kind of attention that they're doing for the work. That's why they need the awards, because they're doing the work. So it's sort of, it's a self-fulfilling frustration in a sense. But I think we also, I think there's a lot of support for women shoulder to shoulder in the work that we do, but without recognising that we can actually promote and propel our counterparts to greater heights by acknowledging what they have done for national recognition. And I don't think that's something that I think as women, we don't do that. It's a part of that leaning in mentality, isn't it? We don't actually understand the importance of actually going extra yard, because we underestimate the ability to see that we're worth it. We know that we are, and we tell each other that we are, but we need to take that extra step and actually make that application. I'm probably guilty of it as much as anyone else. The number of times I've seen amazing women, probably on a daily, if not weekly basis, who've accomplished amazing things, thinking, why don't people know about them? And it's like, well, this is it, right? And they don't often have the platform or the time or the resources to promote themselves because they're too busy working, doing the good work. So then it falls upon those who know them to do that. And I think we need to step up. We need to step up and make those nominations. There's no shortage of talent. There's no shortage of exceptional women who've done amazing things across the sphere within the CALD and the mainstream communities who are doing amazing work, but they just don't get the recognition.
Yep. And I'm going to ask a follow-up to that, Tasneem, and that is, for women who receive an Order of Australia, it is also a platform, isn't it, to further advocate for the kind of work in which they've received the award for. It's not only a recognition of work done beforehand, but in some senses, it also enables and sometimes opens doors to get more work done. And so there is also a fruitfulness in terms of making sure that something is promoted.
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, I didn't see that myself necessarily when I got my award, but people would say, no, people will now look at the work that you do and give it a bit more respect and a bit more gravitas, because they feel that you have recognition. You've been recognised by peers for the efforts that you've made in that field. So you're regarded somewhat as someone who has capacity, more so than, not to say more so than someone else is more qualified, but simply because of the recognition issue. I don't think, though, that in and of itself is the marker. I really do think it's the merit that you bring through your skills and your training and your expertise. And I say that knowing there are probably 10 women to every man that I know who's received an OAM who should have got one. But they haven't got one because they just not been nominated or called up, but they certainly have the skills, the experience, the qualifications, have made the hard yards, have made the social impact to an extent that is phenomenal, but again, not recognised.
Fantastic. Ralph, you've read thousands upon thousands of applications. What makes a good application?
The starting point, I think, is that the application set out the work done by the nominee and the effectiveness of their work, their approach to their work, and not be just a CV of their past achievements. The nomination should be accompanied by the identification of referees who are appropriate to the area in which the nominee works or operates. It is, I think, incumbent upon recipients of awards, and I don't want to load you up too much, or you, Carla, for that matter, but it's incumbent upon the recipients of awards to nominate other deserving people, because that is a way in which, using the example of women or using the example of culturally diverse communities, that is the way that the members of a culturally diverse community or women assisting other women lift all, the old cliche about the rising tide lifting all boats. And so having been recognised in this way, unexpectedly as it would have been, it's then rests on your shoulders to turn to identify other deserving women and make sure they're nominated in that way. As I understand it, there's an online process. People may need assistance in completing nominations, and again, those who've been successfully nominated and can then develop a bit of an understanding about the process, can encourage others to nominate as well. That is, identify and nominate deserving people. There was a process that the council undertook to speak, much as we're doing in this webinar, to encourage nominations from a broader range of groups within the community, and that's an important process. Similarly, members of both state and federal parliaments are encouraged to nominate deserving people, and that's an important part of the process. We often hear people say, oh, I know this person or that person who's never received an award and should have, perhaps not appreciating that they'll never receive an award if you don't nominate them. The council doesn't go around looking for deserving people. The council assesses nominations of deserving people. And so that's an important point to bear in mind.
Can I just add to that, Ralph, is that prior to me getting the award last year, I know in the past year before that, and probably 2 to 3 years before that, I've actually written so many testimonies, that were testimonials to applications that were made. So I don't know who made the initial application, because that information isn't given to me. Yes. I'm contacted in the capacity as a known person to the nominee, and I'm asked a series of questions, like you said, accounting for character and capacity, as opposed to just the CV stuff. What are they like? What would you say about them? What's been your experience of working with them, etc. So it was very much character based, and I've done that on numerous occasions. For people, that just occurred to me, like now that we're talking out loud, like, oh yeah, I've actually written supporting letters for about 5 or 6 people who all got up, who I should add, even to this year, were recipients, women of colour. Interestingly, everyone that I've ever written for is a woman of colour. And I didn't even think twice about, because they were just amazing women. I'm like, obviously, there was never any doubt. Like, I was never asked to write a nomination for someone where I went, no, it just never happened. They were all just outstanding. So people are seeing them, and they are putting them up, and obviously at some point somebody put me up, and presumably I had nominations written of me, etc., because that's what goes to the council to judge. It's just a question of them paying it forward. I think
yes, exactly that. I make the sexist observation that women are far more modest about their achievements than men, I suspect. One of my favourite
cards. I don't know if it's sexist. I think it's incredibly honest. They are, like I think I mentioned earlier, they're just too busy doing the work to stop and pause and pat each other on the back when they probably need to, because what we end up with then is a very, either whitewashed or male-washed sort of outcome, and we need to fix it.
One of my favourite cartoons depicts a man and a woman sitting at a table, and the woman apologising, saying, "I'm sorry, my expertise has cut across your confidence."
I want to kind of come down. A lot of people, and I've been directing this to both panelists, but a lot of people think that, for instance, if they put board positions that the person has been on in, and they put their formal roles in, that is what is going to count with the council. And then obviously, to some degree, miss out on points around the actual impact of their work. So I was wondering if both of you can talk about why impact is really important to the council.
Should I start with that?
Yeah.
I think there is some importance to be attached to the positions that people have held, in the sense that it reflects that they've been, in some way or other, recognised in their community, or in the broad community, or by government for that matter, as having expertise in those roles. I can say that endeavours or work done voluntarily, as opposed to being part of the paid employment, counts more with the council. But when it comes to positions alone without the impact, we know that there are people who contribute significantly, for example, in a board, and others who are simply members of the board and attend meetings but may not have the same constructive impact. So because of that, I think it is an important part of the process that the nomination address the way in which the person's activities, whether as a board member or a charity worker or a community worker or whatever it may be, had a direct result to it. So not the title, but the work that was done by that person holding that title. And I think that's an important distinction.
I would go on to say from that, Ralph, I would say that board capacities and community activism capacities are two very different capabilities. And all the nominations that I've made in the past for women who went to, who got up, they didn't have, board governance experience per se, but their community work and their impact was out of sight. It was just amazing. Yes. Now, I do have board experience, yes I do, but I would hope that it was my community work which has far preceded that, and hopefully that's the kind of day-to-day impact I would have liked to have hoped to have made in people's lives, is what people would have recognised for what I've done. Yeah. So yeah, I think social impact is the impact, the change that you can make in people's lives. It's meaningful change that can be measured. Governance responsibilities are also important, obviously, on boards. It's that bigger picture issue. But I think there's a lot of formal recognition for that work anyway within, the AICD sector as it is. So I would like to sort of see these awards to be really reflect on the ground change.
Yes, sorry, Tazeen, I agree with you absolutely, and I think I made reference to the board positions as the follow-up to Carla's question. It comes down to the active role that the nominee plays in whatever they're doing, and so which is why the simple CV is not a good nomination.
Exactly.
You have to say what it is that the person does in that role.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in terms of the balance between paid work and voluntary work, when you are talking about paid work, is there a particular way in which it should be framed so that it demonstrates that it's above and beyond a normal level of paid work, Ralph?
Well, the term above and beyond, of course, is one of the classic terms of art within the awards process and nomination. And I imagine, Tasneem, you were asked a specific question about how has the nominee gone above and beyond the call. So yes, there are people who are employed in positions where they do wonderful work that assists the community in various ways, but it is that additional either approach to the work, the selfless nature of the way they do their work, the out of hours work that they might do by following up. To take up an example as a community worker, the role might be sitting in the office, faithfully solving people's problems and steering them in the right direction and making sure that their lives are lived to the fullest. But the nominee might be someone who goes out and checks on the family to make sure that they're okay at their house after hours, or takes calls at all hours of the day or night, or is known to take on board the interests and issues of their clients and advocate for them in an additional way, and so on. So there are unlimited ways in which people go above and beyond, and it might be trite to say it, but we know the people who do that in our own work or our own activities. We know those who go above and beyond. They carry themselves in a certain way. They deal with people in a certain way, and they're always known for both being effective, being, for example, compassionate, and being selfless. And I think they're the attributes that come through in a good nomination.
Well, I want to move on to referees. How do you select referees for someone? And
sorry, you broke up. You broke up then, Carla.
Didn't hear that.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
A little bit? Okay, never good. Referees. I was going to ask both panelists, how do you select referees? Are there particular characteristics of referees that you need to take into consideration? Should they be drawn from a broad selection, a small pool? What are some things you need to think about when working out who else you might want to support the application?
Yeah, I would defer to Ralph on this because I would like to know the answer myself.
Well, I think it's important that the referees be drawn from a range of people within the community, that the referees be the people who are themselves well regarded. This might be a bit of insider knowledge, but nominating your boss is not necessarily the best form of nomination, because it might be seen as being an attempt to curry favour or the like. This is just from general observation. Obviously, people who are in a position to know the work of the person, that's very important, because it's all very well to say, well, the referee is the Premier of my state, but if the Premier has no knowledge of the work that the nominee does, then it's not going to carry the weight. And to give another example where the nominee might be supported by, for example, a person from a particular political party, then a referee from the other side adds force to the nomination. I use that as an example, but so if you had a nomination for, in a particular area of endeavour, a nomination from a client as well as a person who's in a position to know from a work point of view, gives balance to the nomination and gives credibility to the nomination. So balance and diversity, I think, are the two principles that I'd distill that down to.
Obviously, to some extent with referees, as romantic as it is, nominating your wife or picking somebody's partner as a reference would probably not be a good idea, or family member. Is that correct?
Yes, I agree with that. And if consistent with the principle that the nominee shouldn't know about the nomination, if you happen to hold a very high opinion of your let's say father or partner, and think they deserve recognition, I think it might be best to approach someone else who knows them to make the nomination and let them have the carriage of the process.
Yeah, fantastic.
Makes sense.
And I wanted to get you, Tasmin, to reflect on your experience of having been someone who's written reference letters. What makes a good reference letter?
What? Sorry?
What makes a good reference letter?
I was really sticking to the ethics of the question. If they were asking me, in fact, to say what was that person like, or what was my experience working with them, what did I know of the areas of work. So I really try to stick to the script, which was asking the specifics of the question, as opposed to, trailing off on some sort of, sanctimonious, character portrayal of them, because I think that was really what I'm assuming, that there's a number of applications and a number of questions and answers that the judges are having to assess. So I think the more you can keep it on point, the more helpful it is to I think the process and to the applicant, obviously. So you want to do your best that you can for the applicant. And I would always ask myself prior to answering is, do I actually know enough about this person in the first place that my answers are actually going to be a benefit, or could my wishy-washy answer be to the detriment of this application? And if that was the case, then I would sort of respond by saying, look, I don't know them well enough. I'm not disavowing support for the nomination. I simply don't know enough about to endorse the application process, the referee process. But I've never had to have that situation, but I was always mindful that I would enact it if I needed to. So I'd keep to the script. I would keep to the facts of my association with them, which was almost always in a working capacity. I think bar one that was a personal reference, or I knew them in a personal capacity. And so I just speak very honestly and succinctly to that.
Ralph, did you want to add anything more as to what sort of in a reference letter, what are the key points?
I think Tasneem has summarised it very effectively, and the important point made included. The important points made included that if you really can't comment at the level of detail or closeness that's required, it is better to say so. But it is also important to make sure that there's no hint of negativity. And that's really a matter of language.
Yeah.
Never heard of them would be seen as a negative, whereas the polite way that Tasneem put it, I have no problem with the nomination, but don't think I'm in a position to comment closely enough, is the right way to approach that issue.
Okay, keep it formal.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of the actual nomination as well, is there any other tips that you can give for what makes a really strong, good nomination, Ralph?
Well, first, the primary thing is, of course, the nominee. They have to be a good, strong nominee. I think, as I said earlier, we tend to know those people we deal with who should be nominated. The real task for the CUL community, for example, and for women, is to make sure that those people are nominated.
So, can I ask on that, Ralph, just as a side issue then, if let's just say in a hypothetical situation you have a nominee who's unknown to any of the council, but if the referees, in two scenarios, one which has got referees that are very, very well known, they might be a series of OAM recipients themselves, and they're writing referees for this applicant who's an unknown, versus another applicant who's also unknown but whose referees are not recognised and not well. Does the weight of the referees in any way impact the outcome of the application?
I think it does. So you have to assume that, generally speaking, apart from the most famous of people, whilst there are people among the nominees who will be known to members of the council, and I should say the members of the council include representatives from, for example, the arts community, very experienced people from the arts community, from the scientific community, and so on. So there is a tendency for, deliberately, so that expertise can be drawn upon. And even if the nominee is not known to the council or the council member, at least the secretariat can be pointed in the right direction as to where inquiries have been made. Council members are discouraged from making any direct inquiries themselves, and shouldn't, but can direct the secretariat as to where inquiries can be made. On the topic of the recognition of the nominees, I do think that nominations supported by people who are award recipients have an added level of gravitas to them, because the secretariat and the council can have some confidence that the referee has been researched, assessed, and found to be deserving of award themselves, and therefore their opinion in the area in which the nominee works or operates will be valued from that point of view. That is, there can be some confidence that the referees know what they're talking about.
Yep.
I want to ask this one. Sorry.
No.
Sorry, I'm just on Ralph, based on what you said, what's the selection process for being appointed onto the selection committee?
Oh, that's lost in the arcane mysteries of, I have no idea.
Okay, so I can probably answer that one, as I've previously been the advisor in charge of the Honours and Awards Secretariat system. So basically, each of the states and territories obviously have various different reps that are put up, but ultimately it is a decision for the office that's responsible can nominate people to the actual committee as well. So it tends to follow a little bit flavour of the day. So there is a minister that normally has responsibility for the honours and award system as well.
I guess what I'm gunning at, is there a mechanism to diversify that process?
Sorry?
Is there a mechanism for diversifying that process?
It's a somewhat political process. So I think the mechanism is probably placing more pressure on for the diversification of the committee with governments of the day would be a great outcome. I'm also going to ask just one question while we're on the practicalities. You might have a very good idea, and it really comes through from one of the comments made from our viewers. You might have a very good idea of someone's strength in the area in which you engage with them, but you might know that they do a whole lot of work outside of that. How important is it to, and I'm going to ask both panellists this, to reach out to their network to try and get more of a sense of the information that should go into the application?
You're directing that to me?
Yes, I'll direct that to you.
Yes. Well, perhaps I'll go first, Tasneem, if you don't mind. I think the process of putting together a good nomination is not a simple one, and that the nominator really has to do some background research or background work to bring together the various strands of to support the endeavours of the nominee in whatever work they do. So yes, there are very highly specialised people who operate in a narrow band and perhaps have written 300 research papers on quantum physics. Their referees will be drawn from that very close profession, whereas more general people who do more general good and have a wide range of activities, in order for their work to be recognised, the supporting referees will need to come from one each of those activities if there are 5 activities, for example. And so it is important to do some background research or get an understanding of the areas in which the person's involved. That's a tricky issue because you're not telling them that you're nominating them. You can't sit down with them and, well, I suppose if you're very skilled with extracting information over lunch, you might be able to, but you need to make some inquiries about the other activities that they've been involved in. I should also say that there are some nominees who have done some good work in one area, but may have problematic areas of their life in another area. And this idea of character is an important one in that regard. And so there are examples, of course, during the judging process where people's criminal convictions, for example, emerged, or there is a part of the process of the council is considering applications to revoke awards. So it's important to try to understand what you can about your nominee to make sure there are no skeletons that might emerge to cause problems with the nomination.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, Ralph, and I appreciate that there is a process, and in knowing before you nominate someone, to be as far as possible to be aware of who they are and their full character is really, really important, so that you can make the right selection of referees. And that said, I mean, I think it would be foolish to ignore the fact that there have certainly been a lot of recipients of this award who have got publicly acknowledged dubious maybe characters. On some grounds they might have accomplished certain things, but in other areas they seem to be some glaring anomalies of what we would consider in the mainstream as good character or good personality or good history or good political views. So I don't know, I think that the jury's still out on whether that has actually been necessarily upheld in the public court. I feel that's an area where there's still a lot of questions pending.
Yes, and we know, without going into detail, we know that there are some controversies, and there have been some very recent, well-publicised controversies, and that's a difficult area.
Every year there's some controversies, no doubt, and my year is no different.
Yeah. Final comments and wrap up. Tasneem, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think be the change you want to see. And I think if you're not seeing enough representation out there, then push it forward and pay it forward. And like I said, I know that from every nomination, every referee that I've ever written for anyone that has gone up, for me, that's quite an encouraging indication that, in fact, that this process does work. Notwithstanding that there are some applicants out there or recipients who like you wonder how, but that handful that might be questionable still should not dim the light of the hundreds and thousands of them who are really worthy. So yeah, just be persistent, and if you're not seeing enough representation, then do something about it.
Judge, final words?
Well, I echo each of Tasmin's comments in that regard. Don't sit back and think that person deserves an award. Nominate them, give them a chance of receiving an award and being recognised for their efforts. And secondly, if you're going to take the step of nominating someone, appreciate that you'll have to do it properly, that it does take a lot of work, and be prepared for that process. And also be patient in relation to the nomination, because sometimes the research process might take 2 years. It's not done lightly by the Secretariat. It's not considered lightly by the Council. So it is quite a process.
Lovely, great. And on that note, thank you everyone. Go out, pick some people, nominate them, and let's hope that it changes the gender and diversity balance.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sana. Thanks for organising this.
Thanks.
Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Tessa. Bye.